Great question. How do I feel about time? I feel like time is something that us humans are trapped in, but actually we don't understand it at all. And I think that this is a huge question. I think that as a writer, you are able to like kind of mess with time a little bit. So somebody reads a poem that you wrote, say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, however long ago, they are transported to who you were at the time that you wrote it. So they might be actually accessing a previous self of yours, because actually if you wrote the same poem again 20 years later, you would be different. I think writing can be a portal into lots of different times, and actually it can also be a portal into, art can be a portal for you to move through time as well. And I think that that's totally magical. How do I feel about it? I'm usually quite dissatisfied with time. I always feel like I don't have enough of it. And what I do have, I do worry that I waste it. The places that I feel like I'm not wasting time is always the writing, nature, playing, whatever that sense of play is, being with people, eating. And the more you can do of that, I think the more you can sort of respect time, you know. How do I stay inspired? You can really find inspiration from anywhere, but there are certain writers that I read that get me writing straight away. Like, I find sometimes when I pick up a poetry book, it really is hard for me to get through the poetry book because it just makes me want to write, which is really nice, but you know, sometimes it's bad because you're like, I really want to finish this book, but actually I keep getting distracted in writing. I get inspired a lot by my own life. So if something happens that's kind of funny or interesting, or I'm trying to work out, I'll write it down to try and figure it out. I do think that if you're feeling uninspired, it means that you're not exposing yourself to things. I think that sometimes there's not enough space in our life to be inspired. We don't have the capacity to be inspired because we are working so hard. We are filling our time with things that we feel are necessary to survive. And if you give yourself time and you allow yourself to get bored, that's a real key place that inspiration tends to grow from. And I think, being on our phones all the time, that does, eat a lot of our inspiration, because we're constantly being given information which kind of blocks up our brain. You need space to be inspired, I think. The advice I would give to writers is that they have to write. I think a lot of writers I meet are, being like, oh, I haven't really been able to do anything. I'm not feeling, I've not had any ideas. And I'm like, when was the last time you literally sat down and wrote? And they were like, 3 months ago. And you're like, well, this is probably the reason that, and I'm guilty for it as well, I think that one of the biggest things is getting to the page. I think that that's a really difficult thing for people to do for various reasons. But I always say that the writing will be there for you when you're ready, and it's you that has to be ready for it. I would also say that don't be scared of saying things plainly. Don't try and be clever all the time. Try and just say things as they are. And also, don't be scared of not knowing the answers to everything. That's what's the beautiful thing about art, is that it creates space for people to think rather than offer answers to every question. I can't remember, I don't know if it was Kim Adenizio or Ocean Vuong. Somebody I once heard talk was talking about the mystery in a poem, how to maintain a mystery. And I think that is like key for figuring things out, where do you leave the space for people to insert themselves into? And I think that's some of the best art, is that there's enough space for the observer or the person interacting, the viewer, or the reader, to put themselves into. I also, one of my fundamental things that I was taught very early on is that the personal is political, and I always have written about self, and that is the lens that I interact through the world with. So don't be scared of writing what is true for yourself. You know, you don't have to hit all the themes just because they're in fashion. You know, tell your story. If you want to hit on a theme, let's hear it from your perspective, especially with poetry. Maybe not so much in film, but with poetry, that feels key. I think I wish that I knew, I really, you know, for every artist, I think you always find your own way if you keep pushing through. But a book that I really recommend is The Artist's Way. I think it's by Julia Cameron. It's been around since the 70s or 80s. And it's a really good way of like rediscovering your creativity and also building that creative muscle. So I wish I'd read that much earlier, actually. But I think I came to a specific point I needed to come to it. But I also would say, if I was talking to myself, to, yeah, just not to be so like harsh or like hard on yourself. I think sometimes in life, we always have like different paths we can take. And what has been really freeing for me is to sometimes ask myself, what is the easier option? Like what's easy? Like what feels like a letting go or a surrender? And I think that being in this world as a creative, but also like as a person, one of my biggest lessons has been of letting go of the outcome and enjoying the journey. So I definitely think like I would have encouraged myself to stop pushing so hard. Yeah, I suppose it's always felt like I've been so lucky because I've always been sure that that is what I'm meant to do. And I think growing up it was really hard because I felt like I couldn't do anything else. I felt stupid. And now it feels like the best gift to be able to always have known that maybe I don't know the art form, or maybe I don't know what it's going to look like or what I'm going to create, but to know that the creative life is one that, in a way, I don't feel like I picked. It picked me. And, you know, that is a gift with challenges, but it's a gift. Yeah, the Forward Prize is, when I got it, it felt like really important. And I think that in a lot of ways it's not important. And it is just, you know, it's not why I do it. And if getting prizes was the reason that I did poetry, I would have given up a long time ago, because I've never been recognised, apart from slams. And I think that the Forward Prize in particular has felt, because it lives in a world of being really prestigious and about poetry, you know, I always was asked, you know, what's the difference between a spoken word artist and a poet? And I always felt like that meant that I wasn't a poet, that I was a spoken word artist, because that's what I was kind of always brandished as. And I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD, and I struggled so much in school all of the time that when I came into the poetry world, there's points that also did not feel like it was a place for me. And I remember when I was working in a restaurant full time, my Secret Santa gave me a forward book of poetry. And she was like, oh, I thought you would, you know, enjoy this. And I remember looking at it and being like, oh, this isn't for me. This isn't a world that I'm part of, and I never will be, because I'm not smart enough, I'm not intelligent enough. And actually to be, because this is a new category as well, fairly new, for them to acknowledge that actually that poetry is also an oral art, and it's something that has been passed down generations. Like my family are all Irish, and that would have been something before people had the ability to write. Stories were passed on, poems were passed on, and it's really nice to recognise that it's a really valid art form. So for me, writing, the older I get, the more I understand that there's like a spiritual element of writing. And, you know, I'm not religious, but I do think that writing has given me a sense of the unknown and of something else at play. And I think sometimes when I'm reading a poem or I'm writing a poem, the poem actually tells me where it's going, and I'm actually just sort of like a vessel for that. And I think understanding that I am a vessel for what needs to be put out into the world, that people need access to, what all artists do, I think was really freeing for me. I watched this TED Talk years and years ago with Elizabeth Gilbert, who was talking about how, we used to see as the artist as vessel, and then we started seeing artist as God. And that, I think, is really, that's where the ego comes in a lot. And I think you have to banish ego. And actually that has made it freeing for me to be like, oh, it's not me writing. I have been given a set of experiences to write. And it's pretty woo-woo and it's pretty out there, but I think if you do anything creative, being a human means creating, right? Being a human, whether you're creating a relationship or whether you're creating a home or whether you're creating a community or whether you're creating your shopping list or a food or whatever, like that is fundamentally what being a human is all about. So there's no other way to talk about God as being like the creator, and if we're all the creator, then we are all God, and we are all have the tools to make this world and our little universes look exactly the way that we want to. And I think that being able to do it through writing and filmmaking and stuff, it just feels like, it feels like a spiritual life. It's a life where you have to trust and you have to have faith, and you also have to believe in yourself and the work, which I think is all very linked into being human and being spiritual. I would say start small if you want to live a creative life. Make a little bit of space, a little bit of time for yourself to start that process, whether it's just every Friday morning I'm going to write poetry, every Saturday afternoon I'm going to knit, whatever it is, make a little space for your creativity. And actually sometimes you figure out how to live a creative life just by the doing. Little things will happen, like somebody will ask you, oh, will you do this knitting class, or will you do this thing? And it's a gradual thing to live the creative life. It doesn't happen straight away, but it's about protecting your space, and it's a practice. Like, how do you show up for your creativity all the time? Show up, show up, show up. And these things, they start to gather momentum in a kind of magical way, and always trying to get better and always trying to explore the new thing. That's key as well.